And welcome to another Friday afternoon here from the United States Marshals Museum, right on the banks of the Arkansas River. If you've been watching it right here, you had a chance to see a shot out the peak of our wonderful museum here off towards the bridge at the end of Garrison Avenue in downtown Fort Smith. It's just a beautiful day here in Fort Smith. I hope you're having a wonderful day where you are. I am really excited to talk today about this particular topic. About Goingsnake, just so many different reasons. And if you've been following our socials lately, you will know a lot of what has been going on and what we've been talking about as we're in this 150th anniversary year of Goingsnake. It's really just a whole tragic event that in some ways has been blown out of proportion, in other ways has not been talked about enough. And so we are really excited to be able to talk about it this year. And part of that, a lot of this is coming up on our symposium that we're going to be having in another month now here in Fort Smith. And this particular symposium is all about the 2 days the whole months-long event that went on in Indian Territory. It really is crazy, all the different things that have gone on as we talk about this, but knowing that we're coming up on the actual anniversary of the event in this next month, we're just very happy to be able to talk about the event and talk about all of the stuff that's coming up. And I'm going to go ahead and glance down here real quick so I can get a link sent out to everyone as soon as I get the right page up. I know Casey's trying to get into our YouTube stuff right now, and so she'll be in here in a second to help out. But for right now, I decided to come out here to the cafe and get a chance to talk to everybody about this. And let's see here. And I got one more thing to throw in there, and I will be back on to what I am doing. But I'm very glad if you are here, if you drop in, we are following the chat. Go ahead and ask me your questions if you've got questions on what we're talking about. I know that there's a lot of people, I've been talking to some people online recently who are descendants of not just the Proctors and the Becks, but also a descendant of Arch Scraper, who was a jury foreman, a descendant of Andy Pallone, who was one of the guards that was killed that day as part of that, the Cherokee court activity. So we've got just a ton of stuff going on, lots of people we're talking to. But yeah, I just dropped the link to our symposium. By all means, jump on that link and you can follow that. You can get tickets to the symposium and you'll be able to come out and spend 2 days with us here in Fort Smith listening to people talk about the events that we're discussing. So what are we discussing today, though? Today we are talking about specifically myths and legends of Goingsnake. One of my jobs here as the curator is I get to try to walk people back sometimes from things that have been passed down through families, whether it's somebody said that their ancestor was a marshal or somebody said that their ancestor was at a particular event. Sometimes I have to help people kind of figure out what's what and what's not. I see William Lewis just jumped in. Hey, William Lewis, I'm glad to see that you are in here. You found your way over to YouTube. I know that, and it's one of those things I apologize for sometimes, is that we're no longer doing this weekly on Facebook, but for a number of reasons, we dropped back to once a month and over here on YouTube, so it's a little bit easier for everybody in some cases. But some of the stuff that we get to talk about, especially with Goingsnake, is there's been 150 years of going back and forth and people telling stories and some of it being a little bit fantastical. And so we get to talk today, myths and legends of Goingsnake. And like I said, like it says on the slide, research in progress. There's a lot of stuff that we don't know about Goingsnake yet, but we are getting closer and closer to what we are wanting to learn about. A lot of what you're going to be seeing here today comes out of the Indian Pioneer Papers. The Indian Pioneer Papers was a project that came out of the let me see here. There we go. It's a little bit bigger for you. Came out of the Works Progress Administration during the 1930s, part of FDR's New Deal, trying to get people back to work. One of the things that happened was a lot of people who were historians and other folks like that were able to go around and start grabbing oral histories from people all over the country. So we have this, across the nation, we have this huge resource of information. Here in this area, the focus was on people who had been pioneers in either Indian Territory or Oklahoma Territory. And so thus, just the Indian Pioneer Papers. Other parts of the country, we have, if you've ever seen reference to the slave narratives that have been written down in different places, that's another example of what the WPA was able to produce out of these different writing programs. This particular set of papers was sponsored by the University of Oklahoma and Oklahoma Historical Society. You can get to these from either the University of Oklahoma or the Oklahoma Historical Society's pages, and you can access these. The thing that you'll find out, though, is a lot of these were done during the 30s, and so most of the people who were telling their stories, they were not the people who lived through these events. Many cases, they were the children of them, or they were the grandchildren of them. And so sometimes you start stepping back a couple degrees of separation from an event, and things get a little bit weird sometimes. And so we'll talk a little bit more about how some of that stuff changed and how some of it ended up just kind of really just some bad information. But some of this bad information that you're going to hear about today, it's information that still exists across Indian Nation, across Cherokee Nation, Indian Territory. I've heard people who read about these subjects, they'll blow stuff out of proportion all the time. And they'll tell just really weird stories about, well, Zeke Proctor was at the mill because of this reason, or Zeke Proctor was at the mill for that reason, or the marshals came in and they did this, and just you'll hear these stories that get told today by people who are 4 and 5 generations off of when these events took place. And so our job here at the museum sometimes is simply to go through and say, that's not really what happened. And this is more of what we were able to find out through our research. And so for a couple of examples of this, why was Zeke at the mill? This was told by a woman named Hannah Grover. And she starts out about the mill tragedy. The miller and a client had an argument one day at the mill, and the miller decided to kill his client. He raised his gun to shoot and shot at the man, but shot and killed Polly Hildebrand, née Beck, her maiden name. And so you're going to hear more from the Hannah Grover in a little bit. But from reading through her comments, the miller is Zeke Proctor. And that's the thing, is Zeke Proctor was not the miller. He was the client. He was the one who was showing up. Through our research, we're pretty sure that the reason why Zeke showed up at the mill that day was because Jim Kesterson, who was married to Polly Beck Hildebrand at the time, who's then Polly Beck Hildebrand Kesterson, he was there because Kesterson had been married to Zeke Proctor's sister and left her destitute with 3 children. And so this is one of the stories, though, that started percolating around as to why it was there. Another story that was around, this is from Walter Graham. Another incident in which I remember among the Cherokees was the Beck and Proctor feud. Mr. and Mrs. Beck ran a grist mill in the Ozark Mountains near the present site of Stillwell. And if you know Arkansas, if you know Oklahoma, if you know the territory around eastern Oklahoma, especially in Cherokee Nation, or what used to be still referred to as Goingsnake District over in Adair County, Stillwell is really close by where the eventual shooting took place. The mill, we know, is up on Flint Creek, up west of Siloam Springs. So one day, one of the Proctor boys came by and left some corn to be ground into meal. He went to Evansville, Arkansas, just across the line. Well, just across the line from Stillwell, not just across the line from Flint Creek. When he returned late that evening, he was drunk. He told Mr. Beck to hurry and bring his bag of meal. Mr. Beck stepped to his pile of sacks looking for Proctor's number. He was slow about finding it. Proctor said, "I'll kill you," at the same time jerking a pistol from his pocket. Mrs. Beck, who was about 80 years old, stepped between them, and he shot and killed her. This started the feud. And that's the first I've ever heard about Polly Beck being about 80. The last I understood, she was in her late 30s, early 40s when this happened. Uh, but describing Proctor as being drunk and impatient, this isn't the only time people referred to Proctor as having been drunk that day when he arrived at the mill. But that we can't say one way or another on. But we know that it was nowhere near Stillwell, and Polly Beck was much younger than 80. So that's a couple of other things. Another reason, this is Moses Welch telling this. And this is again out of the Indian Pioneer Papers. I want to talk some about Zeke Proctor. I can tell you something of historical interest about Zeke, and this is some of it. Let me go ahead and let you see a little bit closer up. In 1862, Zeke heard that a man by the name of Hildebrand was telling his neighbors that he, Proctor, had stolen some of his cattle. Zeke went over to his house to talk to him about the matter, and an argument ensued. Mr. Hildebrand reached for his gun over his front door. Zeke pulled his Winchester out of its case on the saddle, and then Zeke saw Hildebrand's wife jump in front of him to keep Zeke from shooting Hildebrand. Zeke realized that Hildebrand was not hindered from shooting him, so he just shot the woman down, killing them both. And it goes on to say, you see, Mrs. Hildebrand was a Beck. That continues on to the next page. But in this case, it says that Proctor killed not just Polly Beck, but also Jim Kesterson. But here they still go by Hildebrand because that was the name of the mill, was the Hildebrand Mill. Polly Beck had married Hildebrand. Hildebrand had passed away. Polly maintained ownership of the mill. And that was when Kesterson showed up. So we get a lot of different views about this. And just with these three different ones, there's dozens of entries in the Pioneer Indian Papers that mention some aspect of Zeke Proctor and Goingsnake. So we get a really good chance to talk about what they had going on. Another subject that comes up quite a bit is we have William Bentz. One of the rumors, William Bentz was a deputy U.S. Marshal, tragically killed in February of 1872 just outside the Flint District Courthouse, just not too far from here. So he gets killed, but rumors start up is that he was possibly after Zeke Proctor after this killing, because this is a piece from the presidential report on the incident in Cherokee Nation, incident in Indian Territory, that was requested by Congress after the events in April. As part of that, one of the documents enclosed was a letter from the sheriff of Goingsnake District to Lewis Downing, who was the chief of Cherokee Nation at the time. And he mentions in there, previously that is, and this is the highlighted section, previously that is, at the second calling of the court in this case, I'd been applied to by a person professing to be a United States Deputy Marshal to relinquish possession of said prisoner to him in pursuance of a writ said by him to have been obtained outside of this nation. He basically said no. And then the person referred to, claiming to be a United States Deputy Marshal, received my decision and replied with expressions of such plain indifference, if not contempt, of the course of justice of our nation, and also with such evident intention of returning to accomplish his purpose by force, that I felt authorized to and did increase the guard to a number sufficient, in my opinion, to overawe all such attempts. So with this, you've got a report by the sheriff of Goingsnake District saying that somebody had showed up requesting that, it's like, you should hand over Zeke Proctor. And one of the things that came out about this is when you start looking at other things that were going on, William Bentz having been killed in February of that year, it is one of those things that you start to think that it might have been possible that Bentz was killed because he was after Proctor. And so when you start to look at the reasons behind this, here's an article that the 150th anniversary of this article was just a couple of days ago on March 2nd. And this talks about Zeke Proctor and his trial and when they're going to do it and all of the finagling of the judges, because it doesn't describe here that the Beck family had been getting judges removed from the case for being a little bit too close to Proctor. And so what it does say, though, is that the case will come up before the circuit court in Goingsnake District on Wednesday next, the 6th. And so on the 6th of March is when this court case is going to start up. And this court case is going to run from the 6th of March up through it's supposed to be the 15th of April. But so we're sitting here on the 6th of March. They are finally getting ready to call court. So this would have been probably the 13th or so of March that you have the second calling of court, at which some random deputy shows up. So it's very definitely not Bentz. And this shows up also, it gets confused, is because after the shootout, you have another reference that the posse had warrants for Bentz's killers. And so it describes here that Proctor was known to be a desperado, and it being in the neighborhood where Deputy Marshal Bentz was killed a little over a month ago, and where in fact a deputy marshal is shot at almost on sight, it was necessary that a strong posse be sent. The party had also writs for the murders of United States Deputy Marshal, it says here Lentz, but I believe they mean Bentz, who were supposed to be in that immediate vicinity, and it was known that they intended to resist arrest. And so as we start to get into this, we start to realize that couldn't have happened because the warrants for the arrest of the guys who killed Bentz were not issued until May. This is the grand jury paperwork from May of 1872. That was for Wesley Gritz and Dick Ratcliffe, who murdered Bentz. And so the timelines and all this, and this is kind of one of those things why sometimes you might see historians kind of tense up a little bit when people say that they're historians because they like history. A lot of us, we tend to get a little bit tense because we have to go a little bit further than that. We can't just accept something at face value. We have to take it and dig at it. And if we see a fact, okay, can we verify that fact? And so whenever somebody makes a supposition, it's almost in some ways a scientific effort. Somebody makes some sort of a claim, somebody makes some sort of you try to make, okay, we believe this. You make your theory, and then you go out and you test your theory. You find information that will either support or disallow that theory. And so this is like a big part of what history is, and a lot of what historians do. A lot of people have talked about moving from the courthouse over to the schoolroom, and because the courthouse would have been much less defensible against a group of deputies trying to come in. And people picture this kind of a building. This particular building is the original courthouse that was in Sailing District. And this particular building was one of a number of courthouses that were built by the Cherokee Nation. The problem is that these courthouses, by the Cherokee Nation's own admission, were not built until the 1880s, when funding was released for them. There were a few of them, like the courthouse for the building that was used for a courthouse in Flint District, where William Bentz was shot, was a simple log building. And so you get buildings like this that are much better and much more suited for the purpose of being a courthouse. And so the Saline District Courthouse ended up lasting the longest and is now a museum within Cherokee Nation. The Marshals themselves. With this, one of the things, the reason why the Marshals were going there was, I'll get into that here in a second, but yeah, Cherokee Indian by the name of Zeke Proctor, who was a likable Indian to me, killed a woman by the name of Beck. For this murder, Zeke demanded, as well as the Cherokee people, that he be tried by Cherokee laws. Officials of the United States government wanted him tried by United States laws. And so that's, the US government wanted him tried for United States laws, but it wasn't because of the case of murder. Something I've talked about before on my lives is that Zeke Proctor was being tried by the Cherokee Nation for the murder of Polly Beck. The warrant that was issued for the Marshals to go out was for the charge of assault on a US citizen, on Jim Kesterson. And so that's why the Marshals were there. There were two different court cases. They were two different sets of charges. They were two different reasons as to why the Cherokee Nation wanted him or why the US government wanted him. And this is where we get into some really crazy stuff. Some of my favorite stories about Goingsnake are things along the lines of how the shootout actually took place. This right. Here's a fun one. It's not my favorite, but this is a fun one. BB Wine, the government sent their United States Marshals to the courthouse on the same date to take Zeke as prisoner. When they arrived, Zeke started for the door and made it to the chimney end of the building. The courthouse was of log construction with a fireplace in one end. At the chimney end of the house, he met the marshals and used the chimney corners for his fortress. Shooting was started. When the smoke cleared away, 14 had been killed. All were United States Marshals except 3 men named Beck, relatives of the woman he'd killed. With all the shooting, it is marvelous how Zeke escaped gunshot. And so by this, Zeke didn't get shot. It was just him shooting against the marshals, and he escaped all of this damage by hiding around the chimney. And there were 14 people killed, all of them marshals, except for 3 Becks. And we know that there were, all told, 11 people killed, 8 of them from the posse, and out of the posse, 3 of them were Beck family members, and the 4th one was married to a Beck family member. So and then there were 3 others who were killed on the side of Cherokee Nation. So all told, you have 6 Cherokee and the 7th who is married into the Cherokee Nation. And if anybody has any questions at any time, I would be more than happy to answer any of your questions. I see there's a couple folks watching right now. I'm assuming one of those is Bill Lewis. If you are watching, or if you're somebody else who's popped in, go ahead and let me know. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have. But when this right here is my single favorite one about how the shootout takes place. This one is when young Proctor was being tried at Goingsnake District Courthouse in the Cherokee Nation. Mr. Proctor and Mr. Beck decided they would shoot it out and settle it that way. At noon, they drew 2 lines about 20 feet apart. The Proctor stood on one line, the Becks on the other. When the signal was given, they began to shoot. When the smoke cleared away, there were 11 dead and 2 seriously wounded. Old Zeke Proctor and one of the Becks were the only survivors. I have never been able to figure out where to go with this one. Just simply the idea that somebody, instead of trying it out in a court of law, is willing to face off against a jury of your peers, all very well armed on either side of the line. I don't know. Just some people they don't think through what they're saying. So with this 2 lines 20 feet apart, you get all the people on the Beck side on one side, all the people on the Proctor side on the other side, and they're all shooting at each other at the drop of a hat, claiming that there were 11 dead and 2 wounded. As far as I can tell, and well, it's by our understanding of the event, and has been broadcast by many people, not just us, there were 11 dead and 11 wounded. And it says here, Zeke and 1 Beck were the only survivors. I'm guessing those are the 2 wounded. We know that there were 11 wounded, and we know that there were probably as many as 30 or 40 people involved in the shootout between the 2 sides, inside the courthouse, outside the courthouse, around, well, the schoolhouse, outside the schoolhouse, and around the schoolhouse. So, I mean, this to me has always been, ever since I found it, my favorite description of it. This is told by a guy named Walter Graham. Here's another one. The trial was conducted at the schoolhouse under the old Cherokee law. On the day of the trial, the Downings sat on one side, Zeke Proctor on the other. If they stuck the Miller, it meant a battle. And this is Hannah Miller, who talked earlier about the shootout between the Miller and the client, the very first example I gave earlier about the initial shooting. So if they stuck the Miller, it meant a battle. If they didn't stick the man, it meant a battle. The Downings started fire, and Uncle Zeke Proctor killed 6 of the Downings before he fell. And raising up, he crossed 2 more. So here he's claiming that it was that the Downings, like Chief Downing of the Cherokee Nation, that it was Chief Downing and his allies who were involved in this against Proctor, and it was a fight against the Downings and the Proctors, not against the Becks. And as part of this, Zeke pretty much single-handedly kills 8 men. I have no idea where this comes from. I have not seen anything that would suggest any of this. Here's another one. Oh, I didn't mark down who this one came from. Of course, oh no, this was still her, I believe. Is it? No, this is also Walter Graham's. Walter Graham talking about how Zeke Proctor and one of the Becks were the only survivors. This is the aftermath. Of course, he was at last captured by the government, but he was not sentenced to prison, nor was he punished by the Cherokee. He signed a treaty. I do not know all the details, but was freed in this way. And this is one of those things that we know that Zeke Proctor was never captured for this. He was never charged with this. Nobody went to prison for Goingsnake. There were a few guys who were arrested. Arch Scraper, who was the jury foreman, a couple of other guys got arrested and brought to Fort Smith, but then the grand jury and everybody else said, get rid of them and send them back home. And there's a number of people within the Cherokee Nation, a number of sources that you'll come across at different points that talk about how Zeke Proctor is the only Indian to ever sign a treaty as a single Indian with the U.S. government. And I think a lot of this is a misunderstanding of what exactly happened. After this event in Goingsnake, you have a year and a half where there's almost nothing between Cherokee Nation and the federal government until finally the president, Ulysses S. Grant, tells the attorney general, who tells the U.S. attorney here in Fort Smith, to drop all the charges against everybody involved in the event at Goingsnake. And as long as the Cherokee drop everything else and do not attempt to re-indict anybody who is part of that Marshals posse, that they're fine. But if they try to do anything legally, then re-indict Proctor and everybody else and get it going back up again. So yeah, there was a year and a half where nothing was happening until the agreement between Cherokee Nation and the U.S. government, but that was an unwritten agreement. There was no treaty, there was no anything as far as anybody can tell. Let's see. There were, in William Lewis, I didn't know there were that many Becks killed. There were, about 15, as close as I can figure, about 15 members of the Marshals posse showed up. 5 of those being associated with the Beck family. And there were several of them with Beck last names. There was one that was married into the Beck family. There was another Beck who had a different last name. But no, I'm sorry. There were Whiteset Beck, Blackset Beck. I can't ever remember the other one. But Whiteset ended up living. He was, from what we have been able to surmise and what we believe happened, Whiteset was the one that started the shooting at the door, very likely. Whiteset also was the only one of the Beck family to survive the shooting, and that was essentially because he got over to Arkansas as fast as he could, and ended up holding up over in Cincinnati, Arkansas, from what we understand. It was really just, the whole thing was a mess, and some of it, there were issues of how that first event took place. There were issues with how the Becks got involved politically within the nation. And then I think, really honestly, if Keskerson hadn't come down to swear out a warrant against Proctor and the Marshals had not been sent up to wait out, and if the Marshals had not taken the Becks with them, I think all of this would have just gone away. Or I don't know if it was the people, there were a couple of people there who really, really wanted a fight, and they were not going to let no be an answer. But I would really love if anybody else has any questions. Again, if anybody is interested in this subject, we are going to be doing a really good program here in another month on the tragedy at Goingsnake. I see William Lewis has another question. Is there a good book to read that is close to what really happened? No, there are several books out there. Some of them about Zeke Proctor. There's 2 or 3 books about Zeke Proctor. There's also a book that's sort of about Zeke Proctor, but it is a fictional account written by the author of Lonesome Dove, just to give you an idea about what the historical accuracy that might be coming with that. And so you've got a number of different ways that people have looked at it in the past, but really it's only been within the last 10 or so years. And I think in large part as a result of the Marshals Museum being here, trying to get this story straight, trying to get all of the records pulled out, trying to get them all collated. And I think we're here at this perfect point in time when so many of these records are available online that we can instantly go and grab the presidential report on the events. We can go and grab all of these, just really quickly search through and find everything in the Pioneer Indian papers. There's more than 30,000 papers out there, or sorry, more than 30,000 individuals named in the Pioneer papers. You can go out and search them and find out anybody that has Proctor, anybody that any mention of Goingsnake, any mention of Beck, any mention of Hildebrand, and then you have to start playing with all the spellings and things like that. But you can find, I've looked at probably 40 or 50 Pioneer Indian paper entries specifically looking at this particular subject to try to figure out like what weird stories, like what do people agree on, what do people not agree on, and we can start spitballing ideas as to, well, what about this? How about, did this happen? And we can start researching, okay, no, we'll find out, okay, that didn't happen. Or we might find that there's a grain of truth in how it went down. Or, I mean, just a lot of the different paperwork. You can go through ancestry.com, or if you get a chance to go visit personally, the archives at Fort Worth, where the records for the Western District of Arkansas are located. There are additional papers that were turned over to the archives for the state of Arkansas about 2 years ago. And those are finally starting to come online as they get a chance to go through and scan and process those. So we've been able to find out some really, really neat stuff. There's some stuff that I really need to continue to go through with that, because there's some things that there's some things we're starting to discover that might be fictional beliefs about certain deputies that we want to be able to go in and verify first before we get into it. But really, we're just very excited to be coming up on this time, this 150th anniversary of Goingsnake. And just us being able to help tell these stories, and us being able to help people get a better understanding of this time frame, because really, when you look at it, we're living in a world that came as a result of events like Goingsnake, without the issues of Cherokee versus, or just in general, Indian jurisdiction versus U.S. federal jurisdiction. We're still dealing with that today. A couple of years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court made a decision in a case of, I think it was, I can't remember who the person was on the other side, but generically referred to as the McGirt decision. And what that does is it essentially says the state of Oklahoma has no jurisdiction in the eastern half of the state, essentially because that is still Indian territory. It is still tribal nation. It is still essentially reservation land, much the way that reservation land is treated elsewhere in the country. Just that the lines for a very long time, once Oklahoma became a state, people started to ignore that. And so a lot of decisions have been vacated. A lot of convictions have been vacated. And so there is very definitely the Cherokee Nation and the federal court system are both having to play catch up with this, but we're still dealing with a case of jurisdiction on the tribal level versus jurisdiction on the federal level, and having to look at a lot of the same issues that we're still seeing as a result of cases like this. Not to mention just in general, what does it mean to be Cherokee or Creek or Chickasaw or Choctaw or Seminole, much less any of the other tribal organizations within what's now the state of Oklahoma. It's really interesting watching all this pan out while we are trying to help tell this same story about the same thing that happened 150 years ago. So I don't know, there's the historians, we get all jacked up about this kind of stuff. Some people, they don't really care, and we have to deal with that. But we're here to help tell these stories, whether it is the Marshals from 150 years ago, 250 years ago, well, almost 250, or 50 years ago, or last week. I mean, just in today's news involving Ukraine and Russia, there is a task force that's going to be dealing with some asset forfeiture issues. Guess who deals with asset forfeiture? The United States Marshals. So maybe that'll be a theme for something I can talk about here in a couple of months when there's more that comes out about it. But right now we're talking about this. Over the next month, you're going to hear more about Goingsnake. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us here on YouTube. We'll probably get a chance to chat about some more stuff as we continue on. If you are in the Oklahoma area, especially Oklahoma City or Tulsa, you'll probably see my shining face on television, either of those markets, talking on the verdict about Bass Reeves here in the near future. So if you have stuff that you want to learn about, if you have questions, if you have stuff you want to hear on this particular program, let us know. We're more than happy, and we are just so excited because we know that in a few short months, we're going to be able to start seeing people for real here inside the building. We are still looking at opening to the general public in November or December of 2022. So long as the supply chain doesn't bite us, we are still on plan for that. But we are very much looking to within a year from now, sometime within the next year, we're going to have people here inside the building and showing them these stories. And so if you have any questions, by all means, holler at us either here, holler at us on Facebook, holler at us just on our webpage. If you're interested in this subject of Goingsnake, take a look at our webpage, take a look at our Facebook, find out more, or just follow the link I dropped earlier about Goingsnake. And you can come here to Fort Smith on April 8th and 9th. We'll have 2 days of a symposium talking specifically about Goingsnake. It's a ticketed event. You have to buy your tickets ahead of time. So thank you very much. You guys have a wonderful day. I hope everybody stays safe. I hope everybody continues on having just be good, be well. And I'm going to leave you here with a shot of the Arkansas River and the view from where I've been sitting for the last 45 minutes. You guys have a great day. Bye-bye.